Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and call to order the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority meeting of December 19th. We do have a quorum and we are recording in progress. And so to lead us off, Director Aceves, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, very good. Okay, Robert, if you'll take roll.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Aceves.
Present.
Chapman.
Here.
Desmond.
Here.
Early.
Here.
Diegas.
Here.
Ex officio members Click.
Here.
Gloria. And Guetta, absent. We have a quorum.
Robert, I'm not sure if your microphone is on because I couldn't
I
hear
think
you.
it's soft. Let's see,
I just gave
number
you
18.
No, his.
I know, but I gave you one.
Thank you. We're good? All right, very good. Okay, so thank you for that. Do we have any public communications on items that are not on the agenda?
There's no public comment.
None. Okay. That. And then the next item of business here is the disclosures. If any director has any conflicts or anything under the state law that requires disclosure, now would be the time. Seeing none. And Robert, I lost your annotated agenda. I'll find it tonight when I get home, so I apologize for that. That's usually the case.
No worries. We're going to the consent calendar at this.
Very good. So we'll move to consent. We have one item, and that is the minutes of the October 17th, 2024 board meeting. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
Early move.
Early moves with a second by Desmond. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We now have minutes approved,
And for the
Yeah.
record, there's no public comment on that item.
and we have no, yes, thank you for that. All right, thank you, Robert. Okay, so we have 3 informational items, and then we have several receive and files. So we'll start with item 2, which is the CARTA toll program, work plan and policy development.
Good morning, CARTA Board of Directors. So before we kick into item 2, you'll notice up on the dais, and for any members of the public who are here, also over where the packets are, there is an additional attachment for item 2 that I neglected to include in the original posting of the packet. That is the memo that CARTA's new consultants, HNTB, who are going to present this item, have developed, evaluating the status of managed lanes documents in our region. Their presentation will cover it. I apologize for the error. As a reminder, this is an information item, so any feedback that the Board of Directors has on this missing attachment that you now have, we're happy to take and move forward as we finalize the document. I'll also note that the missing attachment, the memo, was reviewed by all of the executive directors of the current and future members of CARTA, and so their comments are reflected. So it had some good vetting, but I apologize to the board and the members of the public. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Sam Souls, the project manager for CARTA's contract.
Good morning. Thank you for having us today, directors. I am Sam Souls. I am the PM for the H&DB team, and we are the consultant who will be helping pull forward the work plan and implementation planning and some near-term policy. So I just wanted to start by doing an introduction of some of our team and our task leads who are all joining us either virtually or in the room today. This will also give you a little bit of a summary on our scope of work as well. So as I mentioned, I'm the PM. We have an initial task 2. This is the informational item that you'll be hearing about today. This task is led by Carol Kuster with Kuster Consulting, who's one of our sub-consultants. I also have Will Allen. Will, coming fresh off the SBCTA implementation work plan, will be leading that task. And at the end of this presentation, once Carol reports out on task 2, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about what the future looks like so you guys have some expectations for 2025. I also have Teresa Weeks on task 4. Teresa brings a really strong CPA background and has also done a lot of work on policy frameworks and how to really move policy forward through development into implementation and operations. And then Sabrina Drago, our other sub-consultant, who's helping with staffing support and making sure that we're getting some consistency of messaging and services across the board, including with any public outreach that's performed. So on the agenda today, we're going to be looking at the output of our task 2 work, which is to really look at other managed lane systems and what's been done to date for CARTA. So This isn't just an observe and report. We really tried to leverage this opportunity to look at all the work and all the investment that's been made to date, especially by YOLO, TD, and the delta between that and what a regional vision could really look like. So this was really instrumental in helping our team's understanding of where you've been and where we think you would benefit from going. But we're also wanting to use it today as a way to enhance your awareness that will really serve as a framework for moving forward into some decision making in 2025. And then after that, like I said, I'll come back and I'll talk more about immediate next steps and what to expect for our work plan in the year to come. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Kuster.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam, and very nice to be here this afternoon. I know we've got the lunch slot, so I'm going to try to make this as entertaining as possible. And okay. So as Samantha said, I was the lead for this initial piece of work, which was really a review of existing documentation in the CARTA region, including planned roles and responsibilities for authorizing, managing, implementing, and funding the Managed Lane program. And we also took a look at key actions needed to develop a regional managed lanes network and tried to just sort of take a look at how prepared CARTA is. And of course, the next task that comes down the pike here is an implementation plan. So this really was a level setting and a foundation building for our team and hopefully also for all of you. Each section of the memorandum includes findings and recommendations with an emphasis on areas that will require CARTA's involvement to ensure effective and efficient implementation. And then where applicable, we tried to layer in statewide context and lessons learned from other managed lane deployments to kind of make sure that you all have the benefit of taking advantage of lessons learned elsewhere. You know, I'm just going to step back one second. Since you don't have any idea who I am, let me just say for a moment that I think the reason why I'm included in the HNTB team is that I spent the last 2 decades running the Fast Track program in the San Francisco Bay Area and the Clipper Transit Fare Collection program. So there are quite a few similarities, or at least there were 15 years ago when those programs were being set up and built. So I really do have direct staff experience supporting boards like yours. So just wanted to establish a little credibility there so you know who's talking to you. Great. All right, so let's move on. So we did, first off, we looked for a mission statement. We said, you know, well, okay, what's the mission of this organization and what's going to guide their work? And while we didn't find one explicitly, I think inherently in your JPA setup documents, you know, there's the implication that, of course, CARTA was established to facilitate an implementation of a regional managed lanes network and maintain support for sustainable operations. I just want to point out those are no small tasks. Those are challenging tasks. Tolling organizations also typically address other points in their mission statements and balance a lot of competing objectives. I'm going to go into that on the next slide. So we've recommended and will support development of a CARTA mission and goals statement in early 2025. So let's look at some elements of what that might contain. So I mentioned that there can be very competing objectives in tolling operations, as demonstrated by this slide. So those objectives for having a managed lane network could include generating revenue. Tolls collected are often used to fund transportation infrastructure projects, maintenance, and improvements. And I know that can get folks very excited in a time where we have very limited resources. Another objective is providing reliable travel times. Ensuring reliable travel times, using pricing structures to make sure that those who use the lanes can expect a consistent and predictable trip. Reducing traffic congestion. By charging a toll, express lanes aim to manage demand and keep traffic flowing smoothly even during peak hours. Enhancing equity. You all had a robust discussion this morning about equity, and certainly we don't want express lanes to move this region in any kind of contradictory direction. So some programs offer toll discounts or credits to low-income users, or those who use public transit, and they aim to make the benefits of express lanes accessible to a broad population. Another goal could be to encourage carpooling and public transit use. High occupancy vehicles and public transit often receive discounts or can use lanes for free, promoting more efficient use of road space. And finally, improving overall mobility. By alleviating congestion in general purpose lanes, express lanes can enhance the overall efficiency of the transportation network. And while it would be fantastic to recognize all of these objectives, as we and you move into operations, there will be times when there will have to be real trade-off discussions about which objective takes first priority. And we think that's the kind of discussion that's appropriate for this board level. All right. So speaking of what we'll be targeting to engage with you all on, this diagram shows how goals fit into, at the top of this chart, the other planning documents that would guide a tolling program. So when properly contemplated, goals are the kind of clear outcomes that talk about project purpose. And then with goals as a compass, policy and operational decisions can be deliberated in a way that conforms to those goal statements. So for example, you need to be able to collect enough revenue to potentially pay debt obligations while also keeping toll rates affordable. It's a little bit of a balancing act. Another example would be offering occupancy-based discounts to a lane that still must manage congestion to a minimum of 45 miles an hour. Once goals are set, CARTA will have a sort of shared framework to talk about some of these decisions and work toward and think about how each of them could be more or less obtained. So using the framework of goals, CARTA will turn toward how the goals are met through policies and what we call a concept of operations, or a con-ops. These documents build off the goals and strive to meet the project's purpose by defining high-level requirements and needs. Those then inform system design, development, and delivery. And they support and document decision-making by articulating the operational context, constraints, and expectations. So the darker boxes on this chart indicate where your involvement is needed. So staff and the HNDB team will be coming to you for your program and policy guidance. And once that's provided, you'll be enabling us to move efficiently to implement a system with that guidance. Significant business matters will always come back to this board. See if I guess I'll just also point out that some of these documents at the bottom, the system requirements document, standard operating procedures, those documents are very, very weedy, and they provide really specific details on the systems, people, and processes that will ultimately make up the functioning system. Oops, let's go back. Okay. So the system review memorandum that we prepared built a table of 17 required activities to get CARTA into revenue operations by 2028. So for example, some of those 17 activities include things such as developing a signage plan and establishing a customer service center. And of course, there are many different ways you might achieve some of these things. Eventually, we'll want to have a lead agency identified for each task. And in addition, to minimize any risk and avoid gaps in delivery, we'll want to be specific about the form of agreement that holds that agency and any others accountable to delivery. In some cases, technical systems and contractor support will be needed. So we'll want to identify who that will be and how those services will be procured or acquired. And looking ahead, we'll need to identify parties responsible for operations and maintenance after implementation. And of course, we need to identify funding for all of these activities. I see a little frown. Does that make sense? Or is everyone just frowning at the concept of having to find funding?
Well, I did say, it sounds like it's going to get expensive real quick.
I'm not going to comment on that, but I will say there are startup costs. And, the work has already begun to kind of talk about some of those options. But you're right. I think while it's nice to think about the revenue that will come in order to have a system in operation, there has to be some upfront investment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the way that we saw roles and responsibilities defined in the existing documentation. Basically, we see a vision in your region where project sponsors like YOLO TD today will take the lead on funding, permitting, and civil work for each independent lane, and then look to CARTA to enter into contracts for managed lane operations, key policy decisions, ensuring consistency across lanes, and implementing financing strategies. So basically, once each lane is developed, there's a handoff to CARTA for ongoing operations. This approach really requires a clean handoff, and it requires CARTA to be involved in lane development so that there's an understanding of what is being handed off. So we recommend setting clear objective standards for when and how these handoffs will occur, and there's going to be more work on that forthcoming. So where do we need your direction? We will be engaging you in trade-off discussions related to several items, some of which are listed here, and some of which are necessarily interrelated. So risk. How much risk is this group willing to bear, and who owns that risk? Is it something that CARTA member agencies own, or is it something you'd like to maximize transferring to contractors or other third parties? Control. To what extent is it important to you to own and manage your own systems directly versus perhaps relying on external parties? Cost and funding. Basically, where does funding come from and where does it flow to? And timing. There are many actions required to get into tolling operations. And when they can't all be done at once, how should they be prioritized? So I realize that's very theoretical, but I think you can probably imagine that if the board were to say, prioritize lean and efficient operations, it might dictate some of these choices about control and timing. So these decisions tend to be quite iterative. And with that in mind, staff and the HNTB consultant team will be bringing options for your direction. So we're not going to come and say, what would you like an invoice to look like? But instead, sticking up at the kind of goals and policy direction level, we'll be bringing options to you for your consideration. And then I just want to note, and I'm sure this is obvious, but I think it's worth stating, that it's really important at this stage of the game for CARTA to build and maintain credibility with the public and those who have an interest in this program. And that's going to be a lot of people, given the corridor, given the importance of the corridor that will go first. So smooth execution really is crucial. I think proper prior planning is very worthwhile in this case. Missteps really need to be minimized. The public tends not to love tolls or paying tolls, and in my experience, any misstep is a real media opportunity. So I think it behooves CARTA to be very mindful and cautious going forward to make sure that that driver experience is as expected. All right, so let's just look at a few of the findings from the memorandum and which we reviewed with the CARTA TAC. So as we mentioned above, we recommend that CARTA adopt a goal statement. I also mentioned CARTA needs to develop, grapple with staffing and resourcing, including establishing a staffing plan, developing formal handoff processes, and importantly, CARTA is unique in having Caltrans representation on this board. And Caltrans's proposed service agreements have the caveat written in that in every case they're asking CARTA to take a look at whether what's being offered meets the need, to identify gaps, and then CARTA is going to need to plan to fill any of those gaps. So that is very unique to this region. With respect to implementation, CARTA will need to refine cost estimates for managed lane deployment so that folks can kind of understand how much funding are we really looking for to get into service. And then develop a sustainable funding plan going forward, particularly to cover upfront costs. This board will be asked to think about a regional concept of operations to direct implementation strategy. So that concept of operations exists currently for YOLO 80. And really the question is, can that be expanded region-wide, Or given the differing nature of some of the corridors, does there need to be a little rethinking about how that concept, how operationally the system will work across the region as opposed to just in the one corridor? And finally, any significant decisions might impact schedule. So right now, the goal is to get into operations by 2028. I think if that were to be called into question, that's an item that would have to come to the board for consideration. I'm not suggesting that that's the case at this point. I think you all can make decisions that result in operations in 2028. But as you engage in these questions, if you want more time somewhere along the way, then it might impact the schedule. So in the coming year, you can look forward to us bringing you policy decisions for action. We are working to add board meetings to your calendar for the next year, knowing that there will be a significant number of items for your attention. And we've really impressed on the TAC that they should be expecting to interact with you. So I think you should be looking to your TAC member to reach out to you for inputs along the way. The decisions that you make will then be the basis for the toll program implementation work plan, a kind of roadmap for the time from now until operations begin. And so with that, I'm going to hand things back to Samantha. And of course, we'd be happy to take your questions.
So you heard a lot about objectives, trade-offs, things like that. I wanted to just share with you our team's compass on how we move agencies through this. This will be my 6th startup agency. And so we know a lot of what works well and how to push policy forward really quickly, but with clear expectations and really driving what that vision looks like. So you're going to hear throughout many of our presentations a theme, and that theme is based on our experience, decades of it, with revenue generating agencies. There are 3 major success factors that we look at, and that is performance of the facility, including the toll system aspect, and the actual moving the needle on congestion. There's the revenue generation, and there's the customer experience. So when you hear things like ConOps and how there's needs to be one regionally, that's because that's how you're getting those decisions to consistently be deployed so that the user experience is the same facility to facility, because ultimately it's a network. So when we talk about trade-offs and balances, you'll hear we're going to frame those as examples of, do you want to err on the side of revenue or do you want to err on the side of customer service? And those are a lot of what we're going to be able to frame within the recommendations when we come to you with actual policy decisions later in 2025. So I just wanted to share that is our mental framework coming into this. So as we pull forward on the project scope and the task coming up, oops. So this is our timeline for the next year. And I want to focus on the pink and the orange. Obviously, project management and staffing support goes throughout. The system review is really what you're hearing the output of today. That implementation work plan is the really meaty part of the work that we're going to be doing and what we're going to be bringing to you. And so we really appreciate your willingness to meet more often and push these things through, because we want that feedback and impact following a typical informational action type process. Within task 3, we're going to be doing really targeted workshops that we work with the TAC on to be able to make sure that we're supporting informed decision making and having a lot of that due diligence performed at the TAC level. So that engagement is going to be really important for us to have, and it is going to get down into some of the weedy stuff that Carol mentioned. We're also going to, we have a decision log. That's a really broad term. It's really just a spreadsheet, but it's really useful in understanding what a decision impacts in the way of long-term operational costs, those kind of forever decisions that you live with, where the authority of that should sit, any kind of technical analysis that needs to go into it. And so it's a really good document, and we use it in perpetuity, especially when we have turnover of board members and we need to orient folks to decisions that were already made and why they were made. And then ultimately that will spit out an actual work plan. And our target for that is for it to be very actionable and very feasible, in line with YOLO's prepared to go to revenue operations. So there's going to be that schedule context brought forward of the world isn't necessarily your oyster. What's an immediate decision versus one of those forever decisions? And what does that look like once you're in revenue operations? If you shift, what is your risk? Your risk profile changes when you're in operations, right? And then as we get towards the end, these near-term policies, I mentioned that the framework that Teresa has experience with as our task 4 lead, that is where we're going to really start kind of putting some of the stakes down to say, okay, we're going to operate this way, we're going to do this. This is those very actionable ones that will actually result in real policy adoption for some of those just early pieces that we can try and push for in 2025. That will allow you in 2026 to go make very fast progress on the contracting and procurement pieces that Carol mentioned. Oops, I had the wrong button. Sorry, guys. I was trying to frame this in a more linear way, and a lot of these will map back to 3 buckets. So when we talk about objectives and trade-offs, that is policy. That is a lot of where you make those decisions of what you want those trade-offs to look like, understanding that there needs to be a balance there for the outcomes you want. Financing and net revenue. We're really going to be asking on some of the upfront investment conversations to take priority over revenue expenditure plans. We have to be able to deliver and get into steady state operations in order to have revenue to expend. And so we're going to ask for a really tight focus on that. And then also contracting, which can come in many forms. That could be interagency contracts for staff support. It could be co-op agreements with other agencies for services. It can come from procurement with the private sector. So we're just putting that all into one bucket of who is going to do what and making sure that's very clear. As your consultant team, that allows us to show where we can get cost efficiencies, but also to do a gap analysis to make sure that everyone's very clear on who's doing what and that those services are represented in actual agreements. The immediate big picture next steps. We really want to build knowledge and have really productive conversations through the workshops that we have coming up in January and February. And so those are, we're really looking for the TAC to have a lot of active engagement. After that moment, we'll be able to start proposing some of the timing on key actions. These are like maybe 5, 7, or 10 big things that we really know we can move forward, that we have some form of understanding where people feel confident and comfortable to decision make, that they feel informed, and that we've performed the due diligence to really bring that forward. And then a goal is to really have the detailed and feasible implementation work plan as our that pink line that I mentioned that we are very laser focused on getting done for you guys. So go have your holiday vacations and come back. Get ready to hold on to your hat. We're going to have some 10 intensive board meetings, and these are going to have a lot of information. And we are going to be framing, as I said, all the recommendations in a way that will allow you to give us some form of direction or action to push things forward. We're really hoping that you engage your TAC members and that TAC members engage their directors. We're really relying on that channel. We know from doing this in other projects that if we're looking to really be aggressive about a timeline, that channel being very robust and healthy and transparent really helps us out and really reduces the surprises, because we have that kind of opportunity to set those expectations and have those pithier conversations. I mentioned keeping focus on upfront investments. We really have to figure that out. So when we talk about prioritization of decision making, that's one that's going to come forward pretty quickly. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, we're bookended into a schedule. So we may need to do some creative things, and there's a lot of way to pull these projects forward. Our team has a lot of experience in doing it in a number of different ways. So I think this is where we'll really be able to bring some ideas on how we actually fit what all has to be done. Like most of the stuff is not if you want to do it. most of the stuff that makes these projects perform and have health in the program are all very must-have decisions. So we're going to be really focused on that and how we can bring some creative thoughts to you on what you could do within the time frame that's given. That is all I have. I will turn it over to Kathleen. Thank you, directors.
Just back to you, Chair Villegas and the board. Any questions or comments?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure there are several questions. I'll look at my colleagues, see who wants to start. Perfectly timed presentation in light of the next item, but if there are no questions to begin with, maybe I'll start. I just want to confirm. So when we talk about kind of the bigger ticket items to start off with, maybe this is premature, but I want to make sure I understand. So the 17 activities that were referenced earlier, and the funding streams, although we don't know exactly, or maybe we do, somebody does, by 2028, means there's this gap right out of the gate starting today that we need to figure out how to pay for activities moving forward. And I just want to make sure I understand that, because I think it's kind of a non-starter. Absent kind of figuring that out, a lot of this doesn't really get started. The timelines don't really match up and we're not able to get going.
That's right. We're going to dig into this more on item 3, but as a primer, what's happened to date is SACOG has loaned the first year of operations expenses for CARTA and has offered up its staff to staff the organization, bring on the consultants, do the work that helps us meet today to talk about topics. That commitment's for the first fiscal year through June of 2025. So we need to, largely under the next item, have a conversation on what does 2025, 2026, 27 getting us into revenue service look like? How do we ramp up staffing to meet those needs? How do we ramp up operating revenue to meet those needs? But part of this issue is that there's a chicken and egg situation, which is why we brought HNTB on board when we did, is that we need, and I need to provide for you all a really clear understanding of what CARTA is going to do in 2027 and 2028 in order for us to make smart decisions about what our staff and operating costs are in that time frame. So these two sorts of things are happening at a parallel time. And when we can, we're going to try to bring you incremental decisions that we can revisit as more information is available to us.
Really, that's very helpful. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of restating what seems like the obvious, and we've heard it before, but the reality is we talk about 10 intensive board meetings and people are reading that and going, okay, here we go. The fact of the matter is that June date is going to come tomorrow. Yes. Many of the dates that we've identified are not out of luxury. They're by design and they're purposeful, because we have to start making some decisions, some more critical than others, but we're going to have to start moving the ball on some of these items. And I just want to state the obvious, just so that we're all kind of beginning on the same page. I have other questions, but I want to make sure folks are. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I want to thank you for the workshop we did. I think it was just on Monday this week. Just so I'm clear, for each of these big pots, policy, financing, revenue, contracting, that will be the topic of the workshops as well as the more intensive board meetings. You will come to us with comparisons with other jurisdictions that run other tolling authorities, as well as pros and cons for each direction we may take, correct?
That's right.
So we will have that level of information and guidance to inform our decisions.
Absolutely. And so the goal of those 3 buckets that Sam put forward is to say to you, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, period. Some of them are high-level policy decisions that are the best use of your time, that have the longest standing impacts and influence later discussions. Some things are really small, like what if there's an out-of-state license plate? What do we put on the, right? And so what we're trying to do is best prioritize your time so you're making high-impact decisions that give us guidance so that we can implement with staff-level decisions.
So I do agree. June is going to come literally tomorrow. So what happens? Like, would we need to have a staff hired by then, or what does that look like? Because 6 months of like ramping up, I'm trying to follow. That was
Yes,
probably somewhere in here.
given a nice healthy
Understood.
fear, which is good. Item 3, after immediately following this item, I'm going to walk you through a presentation. I'm going to explain what I and other SACOG staff do now for CARTA, what I think some very high level options are, and ask you for general reactions to high level options and what more information you need from me. So I can come back to you in February and say, okay, based on your direction today and direction from the executive directors, here's what I think are real, tangible, lean fiscally options for us to keep CARTA moving and get us into revenue service in 2028.
Thank you.
Director Early, sorry, and just to give you a tiny bit more runway, because this is the next item. And look, we are so blessed to have Kathleen with us, right? She was not
She is a
hired
blessing.
for this job. She just happened to have tolls and tolling experience. But we do have about a year runway. So we have a calendar year of 25 that we're going to talk about
Okay.
in the next item. So I know December 25 will
I
come
mean,
really quick.
again, as someone who hires people for.
Yeah, understood, understood. Like, well, that's exactly what we're going to get into the next item.
Yeah, thank you. Can you, is there, or touch on, when you look at the timeline for 25, if any of that is sped up or expedited because of our relationship with Caltrans? Like on here, it's laid out, right? And I would assume that if Caltrans was in a different jurisdiction or whatever, wasn't sitting at the table and had this kind of pre-agreed MOU with what the work they're doing, does that shorten this timeline at all? When you look here in the 17 items where it's categorized, like we're not going to the table and negotiating those all out with them already, because that's already been done. Does that help us with this timeline that we're looking at?
Every little thing helps us, right? But we've been a day late and a dollar short on YOLO 80 for a good long while now, and that's going to continue all the way into getting into revenue service, right? So every little bit helps, but because of exactly what you're saying. Other regions experience this phenomenon where their staff comes and presents to the board says, yes, do this. Then their staff go around and they talk to their Caltrans district and they say, my board said this and Caltrans said, let's talk again. So we're going to reduce some of that back and forth, but there's still a lot to get done between now and then that Caltrans' partnership can't help us expedite, right? We're brand new to this game. There's a lot to do.
And I'll just say anything that we can do to help expedite, I'm here. So I'll just state the obvious. And secondly, I do want to just thank everybody for this presentation. And I think as we can all see, there's a lot here. There is a lot here. And I have a lot of questions, but I'd rather wait until we get more into the details. And we're really going to have to work together because we really are, just to put it bluntly, we're sort of building the plane as we're trying to fly it at the same time. So yeah, appreciate the presentation.
Absolutely. I see this first deliverable from HNTB as a table setting document, right? Where are we at from with a CARTA hat on? What is needed? And then how does that define our plan for 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, yes, very helpful. And I also did, and it didn't go without notice, the fact that you said you've worked with 6 other agencies or similar projects. And I'm expecting that that sort of experience really will help us sort of focus our efforts. I don't know the extent of what the projects look like, to what extent. I suspect each one has its sort of unique qualities and challenges, but I suspect that experience will help us really, or help us, I guess, synthesize the salient questions that we need to address.
Yeah, I've heard a few comments about this. So you are standing on the shoulders of agencies that have been doing this for 40, 50 years. So when I talk about framing those trade-offs, some of the things that we'll be bringing forward are the really common lessons learned of, if you look at the full national scale of toll agencies and you see all of them doing something in one specific way, it's for a really good reason. And so we don't need to go do an analysis of that. We know that from just being toll professionals. And so we'll be sure to bring data and things that compare that kind of, like, I really do believe every agency is very unique, and each project within each agency has its own things that need a custom approach. But we'll definitely be able to put it into that framework for you so you can see where you're leveraging best practice and where you may want to consider being more innovative because of some really hard lessons that have been learned recently.
That's very encouraging. Thank you, Samantha, for that. Director Gary, I know you joined us slightly after the meeting started. Did you have any questions initially, or?
No, I think I'm ready for the next item.
I think most of us are. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, I think if there are no other questions regarding this item, it's informational only.
And
So
Chair Villegas, just for the record, there's no public comment on this item either.
very good. Keep me on task. Thank you, Rob. Okay, so given that there is no public testimony on this item, we are ready for item 3. Thank you so much. Welcome back.
Thank you. So item 3 is also an information item. There's a presentation the team will be queuing up here. But the discussion we really want to have with you all is sort of what's happened at the moment with staffing and funding for CARTA for this first year. What do we see moving forward, and what are high level options that are on the table for you? So I'll provide some background and context on how CARTA is currently staffed, why CARTA needs a staffing change, which we've chatted about a little bit already, and then look at those high-level options, funding need, and you all can provide me some feedback and discussion. So here's how the roles currently sit for CARTA. So I've got 3 boxes here. The first is CARTA administration. That's the real day-to-day work of CARTA as an organization. Budgets, accounting, board packets, clerking, executive management, and then also the work I do on program and project management. That includes developing materials specifically for CARTA, like with the HNTB team, but also includes representing CARTA in your interests in other documents, like the Managed Lane System Plan that Caltrans developed and I had brought to you a couple of months ago, like project development teams that are happening for other managed lanes projects in the region. So making sure that CARTA's voice is at the table in other agency activities. All of that CARTA administration work is currently handled by SACOG staff. It's not all me, right? I'm supported by a robust group of SACOG's finance and operations team and our executive team sitting here at the table. The second bucket is CARTA voting members. So this is SACOG, YOLO Transportation District, and Caltrans. So these organizations review the packets and provide comments prior to them posting. So they have sort of an additional level of oversight on the activities that CARTA is doing. And then, of course, they have really direct influence on CARTA's activities with their voting members that sit on the board. Then there's an even larger group, which we call the CARTA TAC, or the Technical Advisory Committee. This is all of the agencies that are members of CARTA or could be members of CARTA in the future, and they provide policy direction and review the deliverables that turn into your packet items. So that's where the real kind of trade-offs decision and a lot of great feedback for me on where things should go as I lead up to bringing something before this board. They provide that influence during those TAC meetings and then also have the option to have representatives in the non-voting seats on the CARTA board. CARTA needs a change because as we move away from 2025, the work of CARTA is really going to shift away from policy and towards project delivery and operations. SACOG does not do direct service provision. We don't build anything. We don't own land. We're not a transit operator. We're not engaged in that type of direct project delivery and operations. We don't really have the expertise that CARTA needs to get that done effectively. Additionally, CARTA's work is putting a toll on SACOG staff resources, and there's an opportunity cost of staff time, right? Many of you sit on the SACOG board. SACOG has a mission and goals and things it wants to get done. And when SACOG staff are being leveraged for CARTA, that means they can be leveraged for fewer things for SACOG's purposes. I'm also noticing that there's a growing confusion in our region on what SACOG's role is in CARTA and tolling. Starting to hear partners talk about, oh, SACOG is the toll operator because it's me who is going and attending and having these conversations, right? And so what we want is to make sure that CARTA is really clearly a separate entity and has a clear identity and people can go to CARTA so that there's some clarity on the relationship between SACOG and CARTA. So what we're proposing is fundamentally not SACOG leaving CARTA, right? What we're saying is SACOG wants to maintain a really active partner. We're a voting member. We're an active member of the TAC. We want to weigh in. Managed lanes are part of our regional vision. But what we're saying is that first box, CARTA administration, doesn't make sense for us to do long term. So we're calling the question to the board and to the other partners involved with CARTA on what should we do instead? What makes sense and how can we be good team players to find a staffing solution that works for CARTA? So there are 2 high-level staffing structures that I see. I'm going to give you 2 options because it's easier to have a conversation. We can slice and dice this a million ways. Each of these boxes can have many, many combinations, and that's the kind of nuance we're going to get into together over next year and as CARTA grows and evolves. But really at a high level, you can think of 2 structures. The first I'm calling the TAC leadership option. So in this option, if we move to the third box down, the day-to-day work of CARTA is done by a program manager or a program administrator. This is a more sort of mid-level staff person who has some sort of jack of all trades expertise, can manage the day-to-day business of CARTA, oversee consultants, oversee financial operations, and doesn't carry the same salary need as an executive director, right? But in this option, that person needs to have some oversight from executive function. So what we're imagining is that the CARTA TAC members, who are the executive directors of the agencies, would have a more heavy role in this staffing option, right? They would be providing that direction, making sure that what you all are directing at board meetings is getting done by this program administrator or program manager, and sort of being that go-between between the board and staff. You'll notice that I've color coded these boxes. So on the bottom, green is CARTA funded, but they're employed elsewhere. Blue is a CARTA employee, and orange is a consultant. We really see that this program manager or administrator role could go either way. This could be like an independent government employee placed at a different government organization, so they have HR and stuff around them, or it could be a consultant, right? But feeling like there needs to be some level of executive oversight between the board and this direct day-to-day staff person. Option 2 is an executive director. So this is sort of a more traditional model of a small agency. We have several examples of this in the region, where there's a executive director who oversees consultants, any finance and administrative staff, and then the CARTA TAC acts as an advisory toward the executive director to kind of gut check the regional consensus on things that are moving forward for CARTA. Thinking about the sort of pros and cons of these two options, option 1 would have a lower staffing cost, but would require more vigilant oversight from the TAC. If the project manager or program administrator was a consultant, there's a concern about the conflict of interest and the competitiveness of that consulting contract. Sort of like said more plainly, if someone is acting as the day-to-day staff to CARTA, that means they can't go after CARTA's other RFPs, which may be more desirable. So we might have a hard time filling that program manager administrator role for CARTA, depends on how we structure it. And then if that person is a staff, a full-time employee of CARTA, there's this concern of like, where's that person settled? Who manages and oversees them and make sure they come to work and the packets go out on time? And how are they settled in? The TAC can't supervise this person every single day. In the second option of an executive director, you have higher staffing costs, but you have the independent leadership for CARTA. Ideally, this is what we think is probably CARTA's ultimate staffing need. Once it's really a tolling authority in 2028, when we're collecting revenues, CARTA needs an executive director. And so we're sort of creating a relationship and establishing that person's role within the region and having them sort of build and grow with CARTA so that the dynamic between all of the executive directors can exist earlier on. However, there's some potential for CARTA to sort of drift away from the member agencies in this option. Not entirely, but whenever you create a new entity and you have a separate executive director, right, what we want is for CARTA to have consistency with SACOG and YOLO-TD and Caltrans and our goals. And depending on who you hire, you might have different outcomes. None of these risks are insurmountable, right? But there's something for us to keep in mind. So I want to talk a little bit about transition timing. So as I mentioned, sort of SACOG's initial commitment was for 1 fiscal year to CARTA, so through June of 2025, which would mean that if we kept everything the same, the new staffing solution would need to happen in July of next year. Sort of as James mentioned in his remarks, what SACOG is offering is to extend our commitment through calendar year 2025, which provides us some opportunity to have overlap between what we're doing for CARTA as SACOG and the new staffing solution, whatever we decide it will be, so that we can transition some information and ramp up and ramp down in that time period in sort of Q4 calendar year 2025. But as Director Early has already spoken to us, if you want to hire someone in the fall of 2025, you need to start recruiting them in the summer, which means that we need to make a decision on what we're doing and how we're going to pay for it really early in 2025. So that's why I'm bringing this before you all today, is to really start to get those initial feedback so that I can flesh out more clear options for you with some associated costs estimated for them, and you can make a more clear decision in 2025. I want to talk a bit about funding need, which has also come up today. Oh, go ahead.
I just, I was trying to figure out, should I Should I jump in or wait till the end? Um, I, you know what, I'm gonna wait till the end because I do have several thoughts. I'll wait till the end.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, on the funding side, these are two very interrelated topics. So what I've done here is create what I like to call planner math, right? So I've sort of put on the the axis there, just dollar signs. HNTV is helping us figure this out with their implementation work plan that they're developing. So I'll be able to refine each of these boxes into a more exact dollar number as we get over the course of 2025. What we know is that in the orange, we're always going to need some sort of staffing and administration to keep CARTA running. Overview consultants, that'll probably be relatively the same over the course of these years, 10% plus or minus on those numbers there. Well, what are bigger deltas are the more direct costs associated with CARTA, contracts and legal, procuring roadside to put the actual readers on the road, having a back office so that someone can set up an account and add money to their toll account. All of those things are contracts CARTA is going to need to get into before 2028. This is a lot to cover right now, and we are working to try to solve this long-term decision. But again, there's a chicken and egg problem where we need to know these numbers in order to be able to properly fund them. What we have right now is that first year, fiscal year 24-25, that SACOG loan to CARTA. And what I'm proposing is that we focus our conversation in early 2025 on the base amount we know we need for fiscal year 25-26. Thinking about that staffing and administration and make a smart, lean decision for that for our next fiscal year. And then as more information on traffic and revenue studies, the costs of these blue boxes are available to us, we bring that back to you to make other decisions on how to continue to fund CARTA's operations. So as I lead you into discussion options here, I'm especially curious on, what staffing options are you leaning towards and what information would be helpful to you to make this decision next year. There's also some language in the staff report that suggests that SACOG's managed fund, which is the original source of the first year of funding, is potentially an option for that first that orange box for fiscal year 25-26. And so I think if that's something that this board is interested in, it would be great to get that direction today so we can try to have SACOG discussions, the negotiations, and bring that to the SACOG board in the spring as well.
So hang on one second.
Mhm.
Director Pierre? You want to wait? Okay, very good.
That's my slide.
All right. That's it?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So that is it. You want to jump in, Eric? You start first.
Yeah, thank you. Whoa, that's a strong one. Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I guess as a potential member agency in the future here, I look at this and see there's what you want and there's what we need. And one of the concerns that I do have is incurring a number of amount of costs. And I think to your point, Mr. Chair, that it's that tricky window of 2025 to 2028. But as sometimes we know these projects may not start in 2028. So if it continues to go further before we actually start collecting revenue, then, we may have a longer time where we're incurring more debt. And I feel very confident right now in the expertise of the tech that we have. And not only that, but I think that while I think it's a very slight potential, the drift away concept could be problematic. I think the more multi-agency interactions that we have now in developing that, it's going to help, I know, at least at the Sacramento side, guide into the growth of that. And so we're growing together. And yeah, it is more complicated, but I mean, I think the earlier presentations already putting us to work with the aggressive hearings. I have a feeling we're going to probably doing more of this. So, I could see us as soon as there's a clear light at the end of the tunnel, we could pivot to an executive director, but I would probably caution, as much as we would want an executive director now, to start incurring a lot of debt before we actually know kind of where our finance models are. And I think if I recall when we started looking at the potential models, there's not a lot of new revenue that's going to be generated through these toll lanes. So it's not like we're creating anything that's going to be a big revenue generator. So I would just caution that as a future member agency that might come into it, that we're coming into an agency with a lot of debt as well. So I think if we didn't have this robust expertise in the tech, I'd probably think a little differently. But those are, I would say we moved to option one, and then when we feel comfortable to pivot to option two, but that's just my initial answer. Thank you.
Very good. Sure.
I could barely contain myself when I saw your slide on your options. In fact, I think I actually said something to our chair. So I have the benefit of running of an old and very complex organization, and so have lots of lessons learned. I will try to apply here for us on you get what you pay for. And that's just an unfortunate fact. And I've also had the opportunity over the past couple of years being elected, seeing the difference, sitting on different commissions and committees, what you get when you have an executive director and when you have staff level. There is going to be a lot of complex decisions, and quite frankly, even just trying to ramp up and build a sustainable model, that you're going to need a level of expertise that you will be able to get tagging in from our TAC, but not the day-to-day. I would strongly caution against option one. Again, this is just lessons learned painfully over years. And then what I would also say, and I didn't understand your drift comment, quite frankly, because I have an executive director that manages in SACOG to pull all of these differing organizations and municipalities together. And he does it so gracefully. I can't say what happened before you, James, but I can say that I'm always impressed with your ability to straddle the needs across all of our needs. I have no idea. Is it 28 representation, 28, 25 on SACOG? So there's that. And like I said, I've also seen Autumn do an amazing job of going across different counties, municipalities. So I have to admit, when I saw that, I was like confused. But you probably wanted to at least have some con. So I get that. I just don't think that's a real one. And so for me, the only other thing I would say in regards to just having a program manager trying to lead this is because you would have someone that would be less empowered, less experienced, because again, you get what you pay for. You would also have the potential, and you didn't list this as a con, but having multiple bosses, right? You are going to have to fight against very strong personalities and very strong needs. And I lack confidence that you would get that from someone who doesn't have the experience that you would need in that. So literally had a visceral reaction to your option one.
Okay, so before we take more comments from the dais here, what I'd like to do is take any public testimony before we get into positioning on the policy questions. So what I'd like to do is call up Autumn Bernstein.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Autumn Bernstein, Executive Director, YOLO Transportation District. I first want to appreciate the staff and the consulting team for all of the work on this item and the previous item. It feels like we're asking you to swallow the whale today with both of these items. This is a lot. We at the staff level have known this was coming, and like, Merry Christmas, here it is. Like, you have a whole bunch of work. And by the way, twice as many meetings next year as you were planning on. But I really think this is the conversation that needed to happen. And I have so much confidence in this team. I think they did a really great job of trying to break up all of this insane amount of work that you have to do. And I know we at the TAC are having very productive conversations. We had one just yesterday about the staffing issue. So there's a lot, but I feel like we're working together really well. Our consulting team is some of our members of our consulting team. There was that Venn diagram you saw of like, here's all the stuff CARTA has to do, and here's all the stuff that the project sponsors have to do. We're doing a bunch of stuff. We're having similar conversations to the YOLO TD board with everything we have to do. So anyway, it's a lot of work, but this is the conversation and this is the work. And it's exciting that we're finally at this point when we're doing it. 3 comments on this item before you today. One, I do think it's really imperative to better understand the funding picture, not just for this year, but for the next 5 years, really into revenue service, and assuming maybe we don't get it done exactly on time because we're playing catch up, because YOLO 80 is happening on such a compressed time frame. So to the extent that we can have more conversations about what, not just year to year, but how do we really solve our funding need until revenue service starts, I think is key. I just want to note, Carlos Castaneda is here. He is our tolling and revenue, traffic and revenue consultant, that we're developing more refined estimates for the toll revenue for YOLO 80. He's leading that work. And so we're working on that right now to help give you more information about how much revenue you can expect and therefore how much you can reasonably afford. Second point, I'm concerned about the TAC leadership model as well. Asking a junior staff person to navigate the interagency dynamics is extremely challenging. I mean, even just when we put this together, right, looking at board composition and all of that to make sure we want those interagency dynamics happening, you know, frankly, at the board level and also at the executive director level. And so having a junior staff person who's reporting to, you know, 3 different, 4 different, 5 different executive directors, all that have different agendas, is going to be really challenging for that person to know what to do. So, you know, I think ultimately we probably do need an executive director to be able to navigate all of that. And I recognize it's a financial stretch right now, but the next couple of years are going to be crucial. Getting it right, making sure that all the agencies that are involved feel confident and comfortable where we're going, and that the public feels confident and comfortable about this agency and what it's doing is critical. And I think we just need to make sure that we're investing in a solution that's going to help us get through all the hard decisions and get through, you know, launching revenue service. And then third, I would just say that stability is key. I think SACOG's involvement has really been a great stabilizing force for this first year. And to the extent that SACOG can continue to be involved, particularly in some of the like back office functions like administration and financial management, I think that that's advantageous rather than trying to recreate some of those functions as well. So it's not just about the executive director and the policy work. It's also about who's making sure that, you know, the audits are happening, right? And who's making sure that all the Brown Act is being followed. Those pieces are really critical. And so I would love to see SACOG continue to play a role in that way. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Robert, do we have any others to speak?
There's no other public comment.
Very good. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the body for further discussion or questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I have a question, Kathleen. So I'm not clear on how this program manager administrator would report to the TAC when you have, so the TAC would be the executive directors of the partner agencies, correct?
That's correct.
So do we know that there, in fact, that would be a lower cost option if you have these executive directors of these partner agencies kind of administering this staff person for the agency?
So I think the vision would be that out of the goodness of their heart, the executive directors would volunteer their time to do this oversight, right, in their role. And so that's how CARTA is saving money. Yep.
So the region may not be saving any money.
That's right.
You know, I think, you know, I think there will be aspects of this startup where, you know, the perfect will be the enemy of the good. But I think in this case, starting a foundation of, you know, a strong foundation of an executive director, I agree with, you know, Director Early and others, that I think, you know, it seems that would be the best approach. I also don't understand how the drift would occur when you have the executive director reporting to the CARTA board, right? You know, I serve a board of 7 elected officials, and I certainly would be called out quickly if I could drift away from the goals of that elected board. So I'm not sure about that. And then one other aspect is, you know, being the county that will likely be one of the last, if not the last, corridors to have a toll facility, hopefully sometime in my career on Highway 50. It would be helpful to know, you know, as we have these startup costs and initial cost discussions, you know, what the long-term, you know, market size is or growth potential for the toll facility within the CARTA region, so that we can help kind of advocate now as a, you know, future voting partner on this board, help advocate now for, you know, this startup and the investments, because, you know, the money's got to come from somewhere, and we're all vying for pieces of the transportation pie. And so if we could look at maybe there's folks that already have that developed, I don't know. But, you know, full build out of the CARTA toll facility, market size, growth potential, all of that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Very good question.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chair Viejas, and thank you, Kathleen, for your work on this, and whoever else was on SACOG staff helping you. Yeah, I mean, I think part of this for me, I fall in the same camp as Director DeLora and my colleague, Director Dante Early West over here. I think part of it for me is exactly what we're talking about here, right? I mean, we know we're going to get to an executive director format. I do think that having somebody come in at that level, when we sat through the tolling workshop earlier this week, right, and saw the magnitude of what needs to happen, and you sit through the presentation here today and the magnitude of what needs to happen in a really condensed timeline, I just don't know or I don't think the confidence that we're going to be able to get it done in option one in that structure, not because we can't find good people or that the people on the CARTA TAC aren't there. They don't have the knowledge to do it. They also have full-time jobs, right? Dante and I are on YTD, and Autumn has a full-time job, right? She's been stretched completely thin through this process, and having somebody oversee another employee who's reporting to another commission, I think is a lot to ask for somebody. And I do think you get what you pay for, right? I think that setting the tone, we heard about this earlier, kind of creating this culture of what CARTA is and who the public is going to in the forward-facing side of it, I think is an important piece. So I think that moving towards option two is the way to go. I also recognize that there is a huge gap, and we don't know what our funding picture is, right? And I think that that is a huge step of what needs to happen in the next 2 to 3 months with the partner agencies. What does that look like? When you read through the staff report, you're like, what is happening? We have all this money to build the freeway, but no money for staff to run it or do anything with it. So I don't know, I know this is an informational item, but I think the linchpin here is figuring out what does that funding picture look like, and having the TAC or whomever partner agency really drill down on that over the next 2 months. And I do think it'd be great if we were able to continue and extend SACOG for the next, to the end of the calendar year as well. Thanks.
Just really quick, my thoughts. I mean, Kathleen, when will this be coming back? And what are you expecting from us today in terms of input?
What you're doing right now is perfect. I'm going to move you towards a funding chat as well, so we can think about that a little after staffing, but this is really helpful. And the plan is to agendize it for action in February, which will be the first meeting in 2025.
Okay. And I do, in terms of Director or Mr. Guerra's comments, I mean, you are going to get back to us and talk about the funding situation. And look, are we looking at a really long delay here? And how does that affect our timeline internally on the decision we need to make? I'm also inclined to option two, having a strong executive director, but certainly the timing is going to impact the exigency for all of us. But I also think in terms of kind of the TAC drift, it doesn't have to be a structure like this org chart you put here. I mean, there could be some direct connectivity between the board and the TAC. And I think that's something that we should incorporate into whichever model that we choose, which is probably going to be executive.
Yeah. Hang on, let me go to her and then back to you. So thank you for the way you just sort of characterize what this needs to be. I think it's more of a free flowing workshop rather than any clear direction, because we're going to get plenty of opportunities for clear direction requests from staff. So I just want to, so we can go back and forth, so you don't feel like you have to ask all your questions. So go ahead, Director Guerra.
Okay. No, I think the board member Desmond mentioned a good point here, and another JPA that has 11 counties and 9 air districts is the Basic Control Council, and they actively use a TAC to advise the board, and so I think that and I appreciate the binary model, but obviously this is just to get the conversation started. So I would look at the BCC, which is the northern 11 counties and northern 9 air districts, to get the data there. It's the air pollution control officers that do that work as well. But again, I'll just say that until we get a good funding picture, at least a reasonable one, we should be very cautious about how much we're spending. I mean, already assuming, how much does CARTA owe SACOG?
1.3.
1.3 million. So, and that's just going to continue to add up. And so until we can have a good, confidence in the revenue pipeline, we got to be very cautious about that. And so even, if there was a proposal of some kind of a hybrid model or a way to get us there where we can manage our liability, if not that 1.3 million, that's, if we started with an executive director, I mean, that could grow significantly, but and then in no way I think we would ever have a tolling authority be managed by a program manager in the future. So thank you, Mr. Chair, but I'd look at the BCC for that.
Absolutely. Victor.
Yeah, okay. So I really appreciated the feedback that we got from the executive director of YTD on potentially having SACOG be some of like the back of the office, obviously understanding that we would be paying for that and what that might look like. I see James saying, I don't know if that's possible. No, I don't know if that's what you said. But again, since this is a workshop, I want to make sure I speak to that because I actually think that's a really good idea, particularly in our initial years, even if we do have an executive director. What I will also say as putting my CEO hat on is that part of your job, and have directed Autumn to do the same for YTD as our executive director. I've directed Ian, who is our executive director for our housing authority in Yolo County. Part of your job is to actually find fiscal sustainability and responsibility there as well. And I appreciate the fact that we're trying to figure out how we might pay for that. But my hope would be if we get a good executive director, that they would not only have the experience, but be a thought partner. And what does sustainability look like for an organization like this? And what are the possibilities? I'm going to assume, because I am not an expert in tolling or even transportation, by the way, but Health and Human Services, that for something like this, if we hired someone, they would be able to tell us more about what that looks like. And so I really do appreciate this idea that, well, we've got to build it first and then they might come. But my thought would be we may not be the experts in building, and even our TAC may not be the experts in something like building a tolling authority. Let's be real, right? None of us have done it before, including our TAC. Again, my hope would be our executive director would. There you go.
All right, so, yes, sir. You want to jump in?
Yeah, and I'm sort of gonna reiterate some of the things that's already been said, which going to February, we'll come back for the vote. Obviously, getting a good understanding of what the cost looks like, not just for next year, but again, like you said, Kathleen, it's been studied before, until we start getting those toll revenues, and then what those toll revenues look like, because toll revenues, as everybody knows, and I'm not an expert either, by the way, but they're dynamic, right? The first years could be so much, and then as the years go on, they go up or whatever they do. So getting a good understanding of all of that will give us a good understanding of the whole picture to get us to better solutions. The other part I'll say just briefly, and this could be, a tag more of an item. There are some things that maybe are already included in the project itself, are funded by the project. So let's look at that so we can get that good funding picture lined up. That's all. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair,
Thank you so much.
I just
Yes,
have a few pieces of information that I think would be helpful to add to your discussion today. So focusing a little bit on the short term, there's a receive and file item here on the quarterly financials. And so it's true, Director Guerra, that yes, SACOG did loan $1.3 million. However, we've been efficient because we're only billing for the time that it actually takes to move us forward. And so we don't project that we're going to spend that full $1.3 million in the first year. I think the second thing I want to raise is regarding the staffing, right? So Kathleen and James mentioned SACOG can commit through the end of calendar year 2025 to provide the support that you're seeing today. However, our proposal at that time is that we really split things, right? So some of the back office is how you characterize it. That is going to be our administrative support, the team that's helping to put a budget together and those things. We can continue to do that, whether it's working with an executive director. But if the board is not envisioning, and this is a discussion you pick up next year, hiring an executive director in January of 2026, then I think there needs to be some consultant support because Kathleen's got other work that she's going to be doing. And so we'll have that component.
Already
Plus,
costing us more money.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
Good.
very helpful.
So just on the short term there, and then I think one final piece, and then I'll stop, is just in terms of where we're headed and kind of that financial forecast, right? There are these baseline costs that Kathleen had in orange, and those are the costs that, we can keep pretty low, hopefully around the million plus or minus. It's those other costs that are going to be beneficial to YOLO TD in the short term, but will also be beneficial to Sacramento County and other projects that come on in the future. So that's the investment piece that you have to have a discussion about. And what's number one, HNTB is going to help you figure that out. And then number two, how do you finance that until you get your first toll revenue from your regional network coming in?
That's very helpful. Thank you. Director Guerra?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, thank you, Eric. That's helpful. I think for our next meeting, I'd like to see, what are the smorgasbord of backside options or, that could support the agency so that we can manage that. I mean, I know, I don't disagree at all, that, trying to get a full office going moving forward is helpful. And also SACOG's got a lot on its plate as well. But I just want to be realistic that those those costs balloon pretty quickly, if you, on the administrative side. So that's just my caution there.
Fair enough. And
Chair, if
so-
I could.
Yes, sir.
Just by way of context too, and I think it's a good conversation and it's an important one, but just to frame this up, we're talking about a project, the first project out of the gate that's hundreds of millions, right? We're going to be talking about revenue that's tens of millions and then life cycle, hundreds of millions, and quite frankly, over 30 years, billions of dollars of revenue. And so when we're talking about this staffing, and we can get more information, we should, we're talking about a decision in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So
Yes.
I would be a little cautious to sort of try to cut it so quick to the bone because we're worried about a few $100,000, because you are going to want somebody who's going to establish the culture. And I'll give you a thought exercise. It's 9 a.m. A beat reporter from KCRA calls and says, I need someone on location in 90 minutes to represent CARTA, and they're going to be backlit by a camera. Who you sent it, you're going to want that person for those it's sort of like a pilot. They don't do a lot, but if they don't land the plane, it's a really big problem. And so in the early years, may you have more than you need in an executive director? Maybe you do. And maybe you've invested a little bit more than you'd love to in a perfect world administratively. But for CARTA and for pricing in the region, when YOLO goes live, and that's when most people will start to realize there's a CARTA and there's a fast track and there's tolling, they don't know any of this is going on.
Yep.
But when your first project goes live and you have implementation issues, because they all do, you're going to want to make sure you can survive those 4 to 6 months, right? And so as we move into the second half of this with funding, I would ask you to keep that in context. And I wouldn't think about this as costs. This is startup and this is investment. And this is really, in a way, the broad question to this body is, do you want pricing in the capital region? And if you want pricing in the capital region for 30 years, then there's going to be upfront investment in years 0 to 5. And that's now what you're going to be faced to wrestle with. And also recognize this is occurring in a broader context where we have electrification going up. We have people at 2 different state agencies looking at road pricing and road usage charging. We have fuel tax revenue declining. And so this body and its ability to be at the table as pricing continues to escalate in the region and in the state of California is important. And so, as somebody who did a lot of hiring, we don't want to be too cheap. We want to get it right. So thank
Very
you
good.
for the
Well,
opportunity.
Thank you for that. Very, very helpful. So I got the look. I know the look, Kathleen, the one that you gave me. So while we don't have to conclude the discussion necessarily on this item, this is food for thought. I suspect the consultants and yourself, Kathleen, will continue to distill the policy questions, both the immediate short term and some of the longer term questions. As we turn the corner to 2025, we're going to have to dig deeper and deeper. I think you're hearing a coalescing around sort of the staffing structure, if you will, on this one. You teased this one out for us, and we can't help ourselves. So you created an opportunity for us to discuss. And I think you're hearing some coalescing around a preferred path. And you may have heard other stuff, but I think that starts to synthesize. You wanted to get into the funding piece, unless there are any other comments or questions before you transition.
Yeah, I think Director Click did a good job of queuing this up, but I just want to say this a bit ambiguous delta that we need between CARTA today and CARTA collecting toll revenue in 2028. CARTA we just made, right, with a JPA agreement and Dreams. And so it doesn't have a credit rating. It doesn't have guarantees. So when we think about putting together operations revenue for these first couple years, it's like us at this table and the connections that we have in this region. So the executive directors and I, in partnership with them, are working on this together. But I just want to put that on the table for you as the conversations that you go back and have with your individual executive director and what's going on in your agency and what investments can be made for CARTA about what the clear picture is here. Okay. All right.
Chair Villegas, can I just put a finer point on that? That is, and Matt said this very well yesterday, there's a very limited number of agencies that will be able to loan CARTA money pre-revenue, and they're sitting around the table right now.
Are they sitting to my left? I'm just trying to. Go ahead.
That level of granularity, I don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
Right in the corner?
Not my immediate left, to the left-ish. Very good. Okay, thank you, Jess.
I just have one funding, on the
Yes,
funding.
jump in.
I just have a question on the,
I was trying to be funny.
I have a question on the funding. Do we have an idea? I'm sure you've already given this to us, so yeah, apologies if you're repeating yourself.
Hmm.
But I see lots of dollar signs on the bar, on that access. Do you have like some rough numbers that you've given us already? Again, I'm sure it's somewhere.
I have not given you rough numbers and I will in 2025. But
Okay.
I think you can think of that orange box as being like plus or minus $1 million, right? Ish. And then as Director Aceves mentioned, some of those blue boxes can be capitalized and were already considered in the YOLO 80 budget. So what we're working on together as CARTA partners is trying to understand what's the cost of the boxes that we can't capitalize. And so what's left. And so that'll be part of the conversation in February.
Okay, and last couple of questions, because you wanted us to talk about funding,
Mhm.
right? Okay, just making sure. Are you imagining that we're going after grant dollars? I'm trying to,
Yep.
because we talked about loans, but are there any other options besides?
We will exhaust every couch cushion penny if there is grants available. But the reality is that this is boring admin stuff that competitive grant people don't want to fund, right? This is like paperwork and phones and people. And so really it's almost certainly loans.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. That is very, very helpful. Okay, I'll leave it there.
If I could chip in on, and you know, these are loans, right? These are loans that'll be paid back. There is revenue at the end of the rainbow, and so that can be worked out, and that's why I use the term investment, right? This isn't something where you're just going to continually throw money at something and maybe one day something happens. So there is an upside revenue potential to the investment you're going to make.
All right. So what do you need from us now, Kathleen?
I am ready to move to item 4 with our 7 remaining minutes, Chair Villegas, at the board's pleasure.
Yeah, everybody's good? We're moving on. Thank you. Item 4.
So item 4 is also an information item. You've heard some reference to it already in our presentations today, but we're looking to have 10 CARTA board meetings in 2025. So that's roughly monthly, no January meeting, no July meeting. I promise I will cancel any ones that aren't warranted. But what you see in the attachment is that we have a lot planned for you in 2025. And you heard that from Sam and Carol earlier. So I've given you a bit of a board look ahead. I'm going to continue to refine this and try to include it in future CARTA packets so you can track what's going on. But wherever possible, we're going to try to two-step things to bring you an information item in the preceding month that explains a topic in detail, like how pricing is structured and what the trade-offs of the different pricing models are, so that you have a month to noodle and ask questions of your executive director. And then I come back to you the next month and I say, okay, let's make a decision. So that's the overall structure we're going to shoot for, which is why we feel like the increased frequency is warranted. We're still going to have our first meeting in February as originally scheduled in the adopted board schedule that you all had in last month's packet. But there also might be some shakeup on the board in 2025. The appointing agencies get to decide if they want to change their appointments to the CARTA board. So I'll bring you an action item in February with an updated schedule, which dates based on the availability of the 2025 board.
All right, any questions? Yes, sir.
Not really questions, but, and you stated it, but just it's so important in early 2025 to sort of lock this in because with our schedules and other commitments, and I know elected board members are more tied up. You know how it is to get people.
Yep. As soon as in January, I know who's going to sit on the board in 2025. Our clerk will get right with your admin staff to get those on your schedule.
Thank you.
Also, just flag that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that? So, and I didn't think about this. So, right, these are annual appointments, right? By the agencies?
Yes.
And is that is that what each entity gets to decide, or could CARTA inside of its bylaws decide for, let's say, a 2-year appointment?
The CARTA JPA agreement is silent on the appointment frequency and method. So each member agency has flexibility to make those decisions at this point.
Okay. And I would just, as a non-voting person, but I would just encourage that if there's anything where there can be multi-year seats as we're getting into implementation and every January we don't start over, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that too, but I think if we recall and things have moved very quickly, we had to throw this thing together at lightning speed when we were trying to rush through the end of last year to just make very difficult deadlines. And I think we were planning on punting at some point revisiting that. I think it's probably time that we at least put that on the radar for the questions to consider moving forward, so. Makes sense. Yes, sir.
You know, along with, planning and whatnot, this is going a little bit back to the last item. It would be helpful at least to try to get some level of expectations or obligations because as Mr. Corliss mentioned, the funding location is probably going to be the agencies here on the table and being able to give an expectation not only on timing, but then also cost obligations for folks that are member agencies. That's going to be helpful for our long-term planning.
Sure.
So.
Understood.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else? Nope. Okay.
And for the record, there's no public comment on this item.
Keep me on task. Finishing 24 the way we started it. Thank you, Robert. Okay, so with that, that's item 4. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you to everybody who came today to provide us a framework for what to expect. I think all I'm taking away is intensive and a lot of meetings next year. So with that, receive and file, we have items 5 through 9. Are there any questions on those items? Seeing none, we will receive and file those. Are there any other matters?